Greetings, everyone, and welcome to UX Design Prototyping as Process. My name is Jeremy Osborn. I'm the Academic Director of Aquint Gymnasium, which you can find at thegymnasium.com. And we offer free online courses on topics such as web design, front-end development, user experience, content strategy, and much more. Gymnasium is also part of Aquint, one of the world's largest creative staffing agencies. So if you're looking for a new career opportunity, be sure to check us out at aquint.com. So let's just talk a little bit about the format of this event. So I'll be chatting with my guests for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then we're going to leave 15 minutes at the end to take questions from the audience. If you look in your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a little questions tab. So you can feel free to add questions there at any point. Just be aware we're not going to answer them until the very end. So let's turn to our guests here. We have James Young, a Director of User Experience at SS&C, a Boston-based financial services firm, and a proponent of leveraging prototyping paired with research and testing to inform the creation of useful and trusted products and services. Good afternoon, James. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, Jeremy? Hi, Dave.
And speaking of Dave, we have Dave Rupert, lead developer at Parabel, a three-person web shop based in Austin, Texas. He co-hosts the Shop Talk Show with Chris Koye, a weekly sound effects podcast that happens to cover web design. And this is a semi-secret, Dave, but you're currently writing a book on prototyping, is what I have heard. Is this correct or incorrect?
I mean, it's a bit of a secret, but it is. I'm prototyping a book on prototyping, which, you know, dog fooding your own thing. That's.
I like that.
I did it.
Cool. Well, let's do something here. I want to. So let's stick with you, Dave, just for a second. What I want to do is So you work for a shop called Parabel, and you do what essentially? Like, what's kind of how do you describe your core kind of business or competency there?
Yeah. So I'm the developer at Parabel. We're a three-person shop. We do bring in friends from time to time or project to project, kind of, which is nice because we get to work with our friends. But we are essentially a three-person team, and we have a lot of overlap between design and development. I'm more on the development end of the spectrum. Reagan is our lead designer. He's more on the designer end of the spectrum, but does code as well. And then Trent Walton's kind of in the middle. He's kind of the guy who you teach him how to do something, and then 2 weeks later he'll be better than you at it. So that's what Trent does. And so we are just so we've over the course of I don't know, we were talking, Jeremy, I like 5 years ago we were hanging out, I guess, in Rhode Island, but you know, over the course of the last 7-ish years or so, we've been settling into a role where we kind of lean on prototypes pretty heavily for our clients, which tend to be just the nature of our small company. And it tends to be kind of large companies that we kind of graft into and supplement their team, their kind of indoor talent, in-house talent. We sort of supplement that as like a three-person shop, and we can scale a bit and grow and help them do more things, but this is kind of what we do. So, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit. So this is, I'm on your website here, and this is kind of, so you offer prototyping as a service. And I really like this quote that you guys put on here, which says, you know, we believe prototyping is the best way to work collaboratively. At Parabel, it's just as much a philosophy as it is a deliverable. So I wonder if you could like talk to that a little bit. Like, what do you mean it's as much a philosophy as it is a deliverable?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is we started building out our services page, and we spent a lot of time on it, like more time than probably I think was healthy, but we spent a lot of time like, what do we actually do? You know, sort of this like, what it like, you're like concerned about your existence. You know, we were just like, what do we actually do? And so, but we said like, you know, we do design systems. Like that's a core part of what we've been hired to do for the last few years, or half decade or more. But then prototypes are something we believe in heavily. Like we believe in like getting to code. We believe in like building things up that people can test out like one thing we kind of say is like prototypes over PowerPoints. I don't know if you've been in a meeting and like somebody puts a PowerPoint up of like, this is what we want to do, and you're like, ooh, that could have some problems. And so but if you like show or pass around a device or something like that, and you're like, this is what we want to do. We feel that's a much better starting point for having a conversation or even evaluating an idea than like my big idea.PowerPoint. Like we feel like the prototype is kind of the point of discussion. And you may have to do PowerPoints, and I'm not like poo-pooing that work or anything, but you may have to do sort of like static work there. But for us, the like PowerPoint is like where things come together. So
cool. So Jane, do you kind of come at it from like more of a UX standpoint versus maybe more the developer side of things? Tell me a little bit about kind of what are the parts, like what are the, so before someone kind of jumps into the prototype stage, like what sort of data is necessary? Like I'm assuming there's user research and things like that, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, what Dave was just saying resonates a lot with the work that I've done and with my colleagues in my current role and even in past consulting situations. And I think that key being that if you aren't able to sort of, regardless of what form this thing takes, if you aren't willing to discard it or pivot from what you learn in using this prototype to some ends, then you're not really prototyping. You're maybe just more building like an alpha version and hoping it's going to stick. So I think that that's a key thing. And from that philosophical perspective, is really just about that. Even if it's the most high fidelity, amazing looking thing, you need to be able to just pitch it if it's not achieving it or if it's not helping you out. But I think that goes back to sort of what you choose to do in terms of level of effort or in terms of how you build a prototype really does align with, there are some certain characteristics. They typically are sort of a hypothesis and they have a target audience or they have a certain scale or scope of ambition, depending on where you are in your phase of work. You might be under a time constraint. And so you might need to be really creative about what you do and don't do and make the most out of it because of that. It's usually an ingredient, usually a key ingredient, but there is usually some kind of structure or engagement around that. Who are you sharing it with? Is it internal audience? Is it a customer because you're a consultant? Is it end customers because you're a company pitching an idea and those types of things? And then usually your own team working on it has some kind of, I don't want to say agenda, but desired outcomes for what they want to learn and figure out. So, usually thinking about how you structure the way that you, queue up, present, share, walk through, and then synthesize back what you're learning is something that if you can sort of design that and or know sort of those basic mechanics as you're also crafting the prototype, sometimes it makes it easier to figure out how far to take a prototype.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go back to the idea of the prototype as a type of hypothesis. So, and I'm kind of curious, so maybe Dave, when you're getting involved in a project, and again, I assume you kind of end up doing some of the coding work or the heavy lifting there, but how involved are you kind of at that beginning stage when you're trying to figure out what is this thing trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always kind of start with code in mind, because ultimately that's where you're trying to go. That's ultimately it has to be in code, or well, at least for websites and apps. So I think we start there, or we at least involved in that conversation. It is kind of like a question of okay, what is the request? Oh, we want a new experience for something, or yesterday we had a thing. It was like, well, we need to redesign this page or something. And it was like, okay, well, cool. What do we have? and then what can we repurpose, and then what does the machine kind of spit out is always kind of our question. So either I'll do that, or Reagan or Trent, or our friend Joel or Julian or Jan, they'll all kind of just jump in code and do whatever they want to. Whoever has the time or availability to kind of just at least see what the machine spits out. That's sort of what we always try to do. And then if it spits out something that's hey, that's okay, that's great, and we can start shopping that prototype around. Or my dog is very angry at the moment. So, and there's an 80% chance my daughter is going to break it. So I just want for all the viewers here that just get prepared. So I think that's where we start is sort of in code. We just try to figure out okay, what do we have in code? And then if sometimes the answer is no, this has to be totally new or totally different, or big ideas, this is, greenfield exploration or something, or so it's okay, or blue sky, it's blue sky, not greenfield. Okay. Blue sky exploration. Sure, we'll go do that too. We can go and do that. But I think we're always cognizant of the fact that code's kind of where we need to get. So let's do check-ins. I think a big part of our thing is just that you don't do your thing in a vacuum. You kind of share your work. I think that's really, really important into I don't know. I think that's important for just team dynamics, so no one's caught by surprise. Oh, you created a bunch of work for me. Thank you. I'm very mad now. So,
Well,
that's not good.
Let's talk about how we get to code, because I think that is kind of one of the interesting pieces of modern prototyping. So to kind of to talk about that again, I want to kind of structure this conversation maybe a little bit and talk about the difference between prototyping and design documentation, or maybe what you would call the traditional method of documentation. So I've kind of, I think of it as this, that the relatively old school, although I think that this probably happens today a lot more than most people would admit, is you kind of start with some sort of specifications about what the digital product should do. And then you kind of go to wireframes maybe, and then you end up with high fidelity mock-ups, probably done in Photoshop or Illustrator or Sketch or something like that. So again, these are all kind of these deliverables, these assets, and these could be pages and pages and pages of stuff, right? But they're all static. And so then you take that stuff in the traditional workflow, you take all that stuff and you throw it over the wall to the dev team. Now, in some cases, this might be inside your own company, but it might also be, you're throwing it to another third party who's building this, and then they build the thing, right? And so the problem with that, I think, is that that's a very inflexible method, and it can kind of lead to some tragic disasters. I think of the modern system using a prototype to help decrease that role of documentation, right? So that the prototype becomes the deliverable versus all of this documentation. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of my take on it. James, what's your experience in this world? Have you ever been in that other situation?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what you're showing there maybe resonates a little bit in terms of thinking about that kind of transition that I think a lot of software companies, being in an enterprise software company, for example, right now, there is that notion of sort of looking at that as sort of being the waterfall approach, where you make a big bet and a lot of effort is invested up front. And it's sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, where I think people want to view themselves today now being more user-centered and doing more iterative ongoing research with their customer base. So, sometimes that process is also associated with that entirely not going in that direction and reaching out and then putting something out in the market after X months, years, or whatever, and hoping that it succeeds, and then finding out that there might be issues with it. So I think I'm thinking about the role of prototyping and what might be aligned with sort of the agile philosophy of development, and just where we're at right now is an interesting time thinking about how to involve just the overall UX design spectrum of things that can be done to improve the product and to connect with customers in an agile environment. I still think there isn't sort of one, you can find out a lot, you search for that and you see a lot of case studies and how they haven't found the exact right way to do that. And I think it really depends on your team and the way, what you're working on and the size of your team and things like that. So I think, that idea that prototypes can, you still might be collecting requirements in some way, some of that up front, but then not assuming that those are the requirements necessarily. The opportunity might be, especially in a newer project where you're doing some exploration, you want to be open to figuring out if there's something innovative that we can do here, being able to take some of those objectives, those things, and somehow prototype them quickly, share those with customers, see if you're on the right track before you start moving things into specifications that are broken up into stories or whatever it is that helps you to do that ongoing development work. And I also think what was in that process diagram and that I think people are moving towards is just the act of prototyping is just one tool that I think teams can use to break down that artificial distinction between designers and handing things over to developers, because I think we should be, hopefully, we're just really poised to get beyond that. If people even think that that's a dynamic, or just even the notion that any developer themselves is not actually doing a whole lot of design work, whether they're participating in the upfront stuff, commenting on the prototype before you share it with the target audience, or sometimes, even the course of what we're doing today, we move so rapidly, and if we, with some of the tools we have in place and with some of the teams that have a good dynamic, we can move very quickly from an idea to something coded, and the design is actually happening just before a sprint or even in a sprint, if by necessity, just because now it's a design process and everybody's constantly designing, even up to the point where it's being developed, and then just being able to go back and do that important work of validating that or testing it somehow. But I think, the idea that, to your point, that these prototypes, or you could make up for a lot of that static documentation, they inherently might have a lot of specifications
For anyone
right into them.
hear me?
Is there a problem with audience?
I'm back, I think.
Okay.
So Dave, I guess I'm wondering, like, from your end, how much freedom do you have when you are doing your end of the prototypes? Like, again, if we're going back to this idea of like hypothesis, that we want to see if the prototype can do this. So how much kind of, again, like off the rails do you guys go, or what is, what are the limits that you can do within your prototype?
It's sort of, how far do you want to take it? I think we try to build something that fits in, is usually, like, what's the lowest level of effort, or sort of I hate the term minimum viable product, but that's sort of what I'm talking about. But because I just feel like no one really does like minimum viable product. It's always like, how much crap can I shove into this 2-week sprint? It's never like, a really metered discussion about what is the minimum this thing has to do.
Right.
But we, but there are times like, if you're back to the core question, the hypothesis, or, I like to think of it as what do we need to know, almost like a discovery point. What do we need to know? And you may have some hypotheses that come out to that, like, oh, like animation, does animation make this cooler, like this hero unit or whatever? Does it have any impact on sales or anything like that? And so, we can go and we can prototype and go wild and just, animate every single letter coming in or whatever. But I think, like, we don't, it's sort of like you don't have to do that on every single one, every single test or kind of prototype that you're building. But what we'll do is we'll go experiment. I do a lot in CodePen. I'll just like do something in CodePen and like share it around the office, the virtual office, and people can check on that whenever they want. And then, if it's something like, okay, yeah, this looks good, or could we tweak this to make it like just like 10% better, and then we'll kind of roll with it. That's like been kind of our flow. We can go as wild as we want in a safe environment like CodePen. You start going wild in production, and like people, I don't know. My favorite thing is like if you just say you're going to change the nav on a company website, like people from the basement show up to like yell at you because they just like they're like, that's where I get my money, or whatever. And so you're just like, oh, I'm sorry, it had to like 0.001% click through. I thought it was okay to remove. So
I killed your department. I'm really
your department is maybe not necessary. Oh, I hate to tell you that. So yeah, I don't, but things like adding animation or whatever, like the hero unit is like, it's top of my mind right now. Anyway, but like you can just like go crazy, and just do it. Like go every bad idea can go in there in the prototype in the CodePen. And then you can kind of like figure out, okay, like this seems like a good candidate, but kind of back to the thing, like what do you need to know? Like, okay, if we introduce animation, is that even cool? Is usually like, is that even cool is usually like my barrier. For usually the question I'm trying to ask. So yeah, it's like, is this even cool? Is it worth pursuing? Oh, it turned out it's not that rad. Great, we saved a whole bunch of time. Oh, it is pretty cool. Great, let's start like moving into this. So I think
how do you evaluate that? Like how does like, I mean, you can kind of use your own instincts and so forth, but at some point, right, you're delivering these prototypes to the client. What does that look like? Is that you like sitting down next to them and putting it up on a big screen? Is that you like sharing it on Google Hangout or something? Like what does that actual look like when you're presenting a prototype for the first time to someone?
It could be both. Or like sometimes it's even somebody has an idea in a meeting and I start coding it like in the meeting. And I'm the jerk who does that, but man, I would rather than have meetings about some button, like I would rather like go into Web Inspector or something and edit it and change it and then screenshot it, or for posterity's sake. But like show what we're thinking like in the meeting. I'd much rather do that than like 2 weeks of meetings, 20 Jira tickets. Like I'd rather solve it right then and there. But sometimes it is like, hey, we try to get away from like the big show, like the big reveal, because that's like such a build up to like a like just, I don't know. It's the big reveal. I just feel like in general our industry needs to get away from that, but that's maybe just me. But I think a lot of people have a lot of success with it. So I'm not poo-pooing it. It just I feel like in the spirit of iteration and incremental improvement, it's in prototypes can be kind of casual, just put a thing in I don't know, drop a link in Slack and just say, hey, this is up, like, give me your feedback. Or, you could maybe, I know, I don't know if you know of Google Daydream. Are you all familiar? It's like their VR, AR initiative. It's, they had a really good thing where a talk at Google I/O 2017, but they talked about how their process and they're basically like creating VR experiences on your phone for like the Google Cardboard, or they have a little remote controller one too. And so this is something no one's done. It's kind of new territory. So every week they would build a prototype. And so they would build 2 prototypes. So they built like 60, or maybe it's 1 prototype every 2 weeks. No, I think it's 2 prototypes every week. So they had like 60 prototypes in half a year. But they would do, Monday, Tuesday, they'd do development. Wednesday, kind of do some documentation, like here's kind of what we made and what we're trying to learn. And then Friday they would do kind of a show. They would a pizza party kind of thing, and they'd have people come over and demo the new experiences. And this I think worked well for VR, where you needed a rig or probably access to like a unreleased device at that point, a Google Daydream phone, which didn't exist then. So they kind of would bring people in, get feedback, and then they would start over the next week, and they'd kind of document what they learned from that, and then just iterate on the prototypes going forward. So I think there are places where like a big show or like a demo day like come in handy. I think it just sort of depends on your organization. And, if we were in-house, I think it would be a lot different too. We're all remote. So, so it doesn't make sense to like hop on an airplane just to be like, here is a green button, So I think like our thing is more like, hey, like, here's this, we'd love to talk about it or tell you more, but everyone check it out, pull it up on your phone. And that tends to work. I think keeping it casual helps. So.
James, I'm kind of curious from in your world, is that the same? Like, so I know that, again, different organizations are going to have kind of a different culture, right? And again, being in-house versus kind of an agency, I know you've had experience with both, but what's your, how do you approach that when it comes time to kind of start getting feedback or communicating with the folks who are going to influence that thing that you're building?
Yeah, I think, it's, over the years I've had some opportunity to do things, and I feel like they fall into this continuum of, more strategic, sort of 3 slots of that sort of what you're talking about, that blue sky, moonshot, however you want to position it, that might be more at the earlier stage or at a new initiative or some desire to put things on their head and be more innovative. And so that's where you might be doing a lot of upfront research, maybe the participant prototypes or vision prototypes are a big part of that. And then maybe the middle ground is more exploratory, concepts, maybe using the rapid iterative testing and evaluation, this right method that is really cool, that lets you cycle through ideas really quickly with potential customers, or just, some of those other things like the experiential things of whether it's VR or whatever you're talking about. And then I think as it narrows down from, sort of big ideas to very tactical measures, you get these sort of validation level type things where maybe the research component shrinks and you sort of have what you need. And now you're really worrying about like, can we put something together, usability test it, and what does that prototype look like? And then that could look very different from, say, a broad strokes kind of like, selling some giant new thing in a vision prototype, so to speak, up to the A/B tests and things like that get very specific and tactical. So I think, as you narrow down more tactical, I think that's more familiar, right? And some of these tools and more user testing things, usability testing environments make it a lot easier to share that level of thing. And as you start to work backwards, you get more creative about how can we best, and most efficiently share that, and how much. And depending if it's more visionary, typically that involves telling a bigger story, and then the prototype becomes a player in that overall sort of presentation of a story, and you move to the middle, and I think you can do a little less hand holding, and you can start to actually let people just directly interact with something, and start, providing you feedback. So it's not the same experience, presenting it to people, or literally, doing everything from in-person moderated sharing with potential customers or stakeholders, or remote moderated, or remote unmoderated, all that kind of stuff.
Have you ever had a case where you've like presented a prototype and it just fell flat? Like it just didn't like whoever, like the thing you thought you were aiming for just turns out like it wasn't that thing?
So yeah, I don't know if this would be appropriate to bring up that thing I was talking about in terms of like where you can learn something strategic about if you're even pursuing the right idea, or more that you're on the right idea and your execution is off. I think both of those things can happen. Certainly seen the advantage of prototype where somebody's chasing an idea and they think that the problem is to improve a design or something, and they find out that the customers are just not using this thing at all for some reason they can't control. And I use bill pay as an example where people are directly paying and not using a banks. And then, what do you do about that? And then maybe what you're talking about more is just an execution thing, maybe where you maybe start to go through something and realize that it's what you were hoping the person would get in terms of understanding how they should interact with it is just not at all the way they're perceiving it, which is really interesting. And yeah, we have seen that. We've done some stuff. Even recently internally, there were some ideas that we were playing around with and prototyping for different ways of laying out some data visualizations and dashboards, for lack of a better word, and just some ideas that we had for surfacing some of the things you could interact with in a separate sort of modeless window. It was just really interesting when you start seeing people really interact with something, and that's why prototypes are so important, because you start to see people and they start, and I think the other part too is just getting really good, like what UX design is great for, especially from research methods, is just to try to train you as anybody, whether you're designer, developer, whoever, stakeholder, to be able to let people walk through what it is that you're sharing, whether it's a prototype or your final product, and try to tease out from them what it is that they're going through without asking them leading questions and without trying to tell them how to solve the problem, because you know how to use this UI that you built, and actually just trying to ask them kind of questions. So, what did you expect to see? And watching these people, fail miserably in this thing that you thought was going to work so well, and you just kind of have to figure out how to capture that, and then that's the opportunity to find out, well, what was this person expecting? What are they actually perceiving this as? And because that's how you're going to figure out the next move to prototype something else that maybe that same person could actually have a better experience with. So.
And what about you, Dave? Had any notable failures that you're willing to own up to?
Yeah, well, I was saying before we were recording, we had a situation where a new VP of product rolled into a company, and this person had kind of five ideas they wanted to kind of merge into one app, one native app, and we were like, well, okay, we can do this. So we built out a prototype. We used Ionic framework, which is like a mobile kind of framework, just to kind of make it quick. It has like off the shelf styling and stuff like that. So we used the Ionic, and we built out, built these 5 ideas and had a few meetings, but over, the course of a month-ish, not full time, but over the course of a month-ish, we had a full prototype of all 5, ideas that all 5 bets, I guess, that this person wanted in the application. And it was kind of like all right, that's not cool, and he wasn't impressed, and kind of he's stopped the project. And so that's, I guess, bad, but it was also good. I mean, I ultimately, as weird as it was, to work on something and then they're like, yeah, I don't like it or what, it's like, well, that was your idea, but I think that's kind of what my takeaway was. It was like, oh, it didn't go well, but we answered the question, they, and it could, back to the original kind of thing, was it our implementation? I don't think it was, because it was pretty well thought out, but and using existing components and things like that. But we, it could have been, there's always a chance it could be that. But I think ultimately, had to answer that question, is it cool if we put these 5 things together? And the answer was kind of no. And so.
And that's, and what you're saying, basically what I'm hearing you say is that's kind of okay. And that's kind of part of the whole point, right? And that the prototyping, again, and it actually goes back to your point, James, where you were saying if you're not willing to accept that this is a hypothesis, that this is a interesting thing that we're going to develop, then it's not really a prototype. Like you were saying, it's just like an alpha version of a thing that you're building. But so what I kind of hear is if you're willing to accept the spirit of the prototyping, you're willing to let it fail and understand that's the whole point, right? We want to do this stuff before it goes to code and starts getting really expensive, right?
Yeah.
Do you want 1,000 Jira tickets and a 2-year project, or to overhaul the app, or do you want something you've kind of vetted and people have seen, and so it's not, from a business standpoint, it makes huge sense to like mitigate that risk, you know. But I do think, and maybe James has the same experience or different, but I do think there's like, you know, people in the age of move fast, break things, like people want to just build it into the app like right now, like let's just like spin up a ticket and like build it in the app. And I think like there needs to be more room for the process to like, let's pull this out, like let's not write to production, like let's just build a prototype and do a little bit of thinking in a bit of a safer environment. I don't see that a lot. You know, sometimes I think it gets missed, so in a lot of projects.
Yeah, what's your take on that, James? Does that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely is context too, right? Because you know, you're always battling that tension between, it is so quick now to go from idea to getting that idea into customers' hands to 5 minutes later you have 7 competitors that you have to struggle to be like, you know, oh, am I? You don't want to back yourself out into, you know, the supposed, you know, bad habits of waterfall or whatever that perception is, where it's like you're doing too much big design up front, just get it out there and see what people think. And maybe that has something to do with sort of the scale and scope of what it is that you're building. So if you're on the cusp of something, sometimes that helps. But you know, sometimes it's just timing and you can't control it. And
Right.
maybe you could have held back a little bit longer, not shown your hand and gotten it really perfect, or I don't know. It really is a tough call. And I think it's depending on the project that you're on. But to your point, when you are, if you have, and that could be very different for a brand new product initiative versus an in-market product where, you know, you want to be more, you know, careful and considerate of your customer base, or, you know, whatever metrics you know you have working, if it's in more of a marketing site or whatever it might be. You know, that you don't break the machine, or, you know, you have to add, you can only increase the value. You don't want to do anything to decrease that value by introducing something net new and then having it fail. So that's where, you know, in mature products, maybe prototyping, considering other options and trying to do that in a way that's quick, fast disposable, can be not only just get you closer to the right thing, but also make sure you don't disrupt a working product and introduce unintentional problems.
Yeah, I think this raises a fascinating question, because it's kind of like the speed, right? So I think what I hear you both kind of talk about is like the speed of which you can kind of get up and running with a prototype, and it's almost like part of the goal. At the same time, you know, I don't know, I think there's still this value in, like, you know, the most old school method of doing prototyping, right? It's like standing in front of a whiteboard with, or, you know, paper prototyping, right? Taking like pieces of paper and like, and organizing your thoughts and staying away from the code as long as possible. So it's like this weird tension sometimes between, like, you know, prototyping can be super stripped down. It can be super simple and you can get great feedback. At the same time, we're getting all these new tools, which allow us to kind of segment our the different slices of prototyping and the different, and like get the scope of it, you know, which kind of raises, you know, to that point, like the tools, and no, Kino, I don't want to update. Thank you. So basically, you know, this in our courses, we use this idea of the big ideas, and the big idea I kind of came up with here is that, you know, if you can imagine a tool for prototyping in the year 2019, it probably already exists. And so we've got, again, there's actually this website which lists all of the different prototyping tools. So prototypingtools.co, not .com, but .co. And they've got like, look at this. This is crazy, right? Marvel, Mockingbird, Mock Plus, Origami, Pop, ProtoShare, UX App, UX Pen. You've got all of these different tools. And then you've also got, you know, if you want a tool for mobile prototyping. So we got a lot of questions from the folks watching, from the registrations, like, what tool should I use? And again, well, you know, again, if you're doing mobile prototyping, there's kind of an interesting one, this one called Prot. What I find fascinating about these is this is a prototyping app that just lives as an app on the phone. Right? There's no desktop version. It's either on iOS or Android. I think I found that kind of fascinating. You want a tool to do A/B testing, your prototypes, so seeing whether one is better than the other. So there's kind of an interesting one here that looks super cool, right? Like all these heat maps and just, this looks awesome. I haven't used it, but it looks pretty cool. Maze.design. And then again, we kind of touched on this earlier. We have these new and developing technologies. And we've kind of played around with some of these, but like for conversational design, right? So designing what happens when a chatbot is talking back to you, or how do you prototype a voice interface with Alexa or Siri? So these two are kind of interesting, botsociety.io. And then Adobe XD, which has a kind of a conversational interface section in a recent update. We've already talked about this, right? The world of spatial computing, so AR and VR. And you've got interesting apps like this one, Torch, which is an augmented reality one. This one on the right is Microsoft. Microsoft is now getting into VR prototyping with this tool called Maquette. So I guess the thing that I'm curious about, and just to kind of wrap, to fold that in, is that you've got these apps that are doing everything. And so I'm kind of curious, like on both your thoughts here on stuff like this, right? So we've got this unified platform for everything, UX prototyping and app development. And if you dig in here, you can see it's using UX patterns, and it's going to user flows, and you can craft it in Sketch, and then it spits out an Angular component. And my God, like I'm kind of get exhausted by all this. So I'm just wondering, like, how do we deal with this tension between like the tool chain, right? And like all of these different things kind of that you can put together versus like just the simple, right? Like where's that balance? Really curious to hear what you both have to say on that.
James, you want to go first?
Okay, sure. So back, I think, thinking back to that spectrum, for me, it's like the more blue sky or early thinking, that's what I think favors the kind of tools and materials where you just don't want to constrain your thinking. Right? So certainly some people can code right out of the box, other people can't. And I think it's not about whether you code or not, it's about what's flipping the switch between thinking about all the possibilities at the blue sky end of the thing versus if you start coding it, are you going to start sort of consciously or unconsciously limiting your thinking to what would be easy to implement in that moment versus what's a really interesting way to potentially offer an experience to a customer based on what they're trying to do. And, and again, to me, that's more at that end of blue sky thinking. And then I think moving more towards the middle where maybe there's already something in place. If you're building an add-on to something that already exists and some constraints are already there, then maybe having a better awareness of what's capable where you don't start, coming up with new ideas or not failing to realize that there's a pattern elsewhere in the existing application that would be perfect to reuse in some way for this new feature, like all those kinds of things. And you still want to prototype that and make sure that that's going to be effective for its purpose. There's the more tactical stuff where we start to see, what I'm excited about is that, now that you've got version 1, 2, 3 in the market, now that we're trying to operationalize design, I think these tools that are starting to try to mix and mingle actual components with net new sort of pictures of new screen elements that maybe don't exist in production, like that's the other really cool, exciting end of prototyping where you've iterated so much in your product. Now the struggle is how can you capitalize off sort of the atomic elements that the source of truth is actually the coded version, and how can you very quickly and effectively mix and mingle those things and recompile them with some net new drawing of something, right, to create a new prototype, mock-up, whatever it might be. And I think that's where it's just amazing that there's this explosion of tools that have come over the past few years. That we have a surplus at our hands, and then that becomes even more of the challenge to sort of knowing your objectives and what's going to work best for what you're trying to accomplish. So yeah, it's an exciting time tool-wise.
Dave, your take? What's is it? Are we getting a like an NPM like front end kind of stack in the prototyping world, or?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. There's a lot of pressure to keep up with these new tools, right? I mean, Framer just released, a new version, and it just changes the game, and everything's a dinosaur now, and so you're like, oh, I better learn that one. I think there are things like cool, breakout technologies that I'm interested in playing with. Airbnb has that one where you can turn a sketch and it'll turn it into a high fidelity, like fully rendered thing on the device, like using like React components or something that it machine learned your sketch to anyway, that's cool stuff. I think that could be cool. I have other, I'm like, okay, what happens if you want to update it? Do you have to draw the exact same thing again? What do you do? But I don't think there's like a silver bullet yet. I don't think there's like the tool that does it all or solves it everything. For us, I think our success has come from like two tools, and one is a design system, like a pattern library of some kind. Like if you have that, you can generate pages really quickly, or like the bulk of your UI. You don't have to sit around and be like, what's a button look like? What's a button look like? Or what's a slider look like? Or what, you have that already prescribed. So you just put that in, and again, see what the machine spits out. And then you just spit it out. And then we do code. So we have like CodePen, we have Jekyll. We're using a lot of Netlify right now because you can deploy to Netlify instantly, and you can even do like branch deploys. So if you have a weird idea, you can just fork your whole system, change all the links orange, and then say here's the orange site, and that's an option. And so we've been doing a lot of that. But I will say, regardless of the tool, I think what's really the most important thing is finding something that works for you and getting to that rapid pace. Yeah. What's rapid for one company is different for another, but just this idea of being able to rapidly get out an idea and see an idea. I mean, Ruby on Rails famously had the 5-minute blog back in the day, and you just type 5 commands into the command line and it spits out an entire web blog. I think there needs to be stuff like that for a prototyping tool, like the 5-minute whatever to-do app or something like that, or 5-minute weather, just something that helps you what is again, answering that question, and you want to answer it kind of quickly as possible. I think it does take some flexing, you have to learn something new, or you have to kind of maybe develop your code skills or something like that. I think that stuff happens, and but it's finding what works for you and your team, what allows you to rapidly come up with new ideas and test them.
Well said. I think that, finding that balance is important. And that here's the thing that I want to switch to questions in a second, because we're closing in. We've got about 10 minutes left, but and we're getting these great questions in here, and maybe this kind of ties in with what you're saying. So I think that for folks who have been in the industry for a while, and you've got some background with coding or in UX or what have you, at this point, I think both of you are kind of relatively senior at this point in the amount of hours and years you've put in. I do kind of worry about folks getting into this world, right? And I'm wondering, and this actually comes to some questions that we're starting to get in. So I'll kind of paraphrase, 2 or 3 questions that different people have asked in different ways. So I'll kind of start from maybe this one. So the question here is, how does someone, especially on the UX side of things, what's the best way for an entry-level UX designer with no job experience to showcase prototyping skills? So just in general, what do you think about that? What's kind of a way to do that?
I mean, you could just do the tried and true, steal something off a dribble, and prototype it out. I mean, that's not, obviously that's not the best choice. It should be your own design, especially if you want to be a UX designer. But, I think it is. It's just saying like, I mean, for me, it's like there's like rite of passages. If you go through Dribble, it's like build the weather app, build the like banking app, and just like fit those out and just, it's probably worth your time, even if you don't have a lot. It's probably worth your time to just kind of like try your shot at making this, and it's not, don't do it for the likes, do it for yourself. So
yeah. What do you think, James? What's kind of your advice?
Yeah,
like
I'm right there with Dave, and I think, and I've seen some articles in the past too that says that like, and also pick something of interest, or pick something where maybe you could reproduce the context of a research effort with, with assets on hand, like your family, or if, depending on if you've ever encountered like a school website. So I saw some joke like, don't go redesign Facebook. That's like optimized beyond belief. Go find like your horrible school site that you have to log in to get your kids' grades and talk with a couple other parents about their experience of that. Sort of reproduce what you would do in a client engagement. Say, I went out and I spoke to X number of parents and confirmed this, saw these patterns of things that were frustrating about working through this thing, and then maybe go re-prototype and you could put up onboarding or finding your kid's report card or something, for lack of a better idea, something that's, then you can also showcase something that might show a significant lift too, because you go from something that definitely needs help versus something that's already sort of awesome, and you just sort of try to tweak it a little bit, right? So I think that's the thing that's a very real world mapping to the challenge you're going to get from a client, where they want to see some particular lift or fewer clicks or more people getting to that asset quicker, or whatever it might be. I think that would be an interesting way to stimulate a client engagement from resources on hand.
Yeah, that sounds good. And the other thing too, connected with this, like getting into the industry or kind of getting your portfolio up, even though I kind of am nervous about the amount of tools out there, let's kind of pin you down. Let's pin you both down here and say like, okay, so James, like you're looking at someone who is maybe on the UX side of things. What tool should they know? Is it Sketch? Is it Figma? Is it UXPin, Adobe XD, Photoshop? Like, choose one. What is it?
Yeah. So I guess I can just speak to what I think I'm really excited about for some of the tools I'm using at the moment. So, when we talk about the prototyping tool, a prototyping tool that allows you to capture feedback among teammates, whether they're in the same space with you or across the globe, is really nice. So anything like that have that kind of group commenting tool is becoming more standard feature across sort of all prototyping tools, whether that might have started for me with more so as say InVision, and then also did a lot of stuff with Sketch in the days. But to be honest, at the moment we're using Figma primarily just because it has that combination of combined feature set and speed of tools. And so, between commenting, sharing, production ready artwork, doing some basic prototypes, or even sometimes looking that up within InVision, I'm really looking forward to tools that might start to be able to sort of two-way sync with componentized stuff, because I agree with what Dave said too about having that, in a more mature enterprise, building towards, a coded sort of design library approach or design system approach is appealing. But I think, look for those, those tools that, and if you're doing and that might be biased more towards web. So I think other things might be more interesting if you're doing majority work with say mobile native. So look at some of the tools, whether it's frameworks and things like that. Or, but right. That collaboration thing is really cool.
Dave, your turn.
I'm gonna go CodePen is gonna be my answer, and plus any static site generator that can compile a website. But because I just, for me, it all comes down to code. CodePen has great shareability. I think you can develop locally. You can like build a website on your local host, and that's great. But only you can see that. There's ways like ngrok is a great tool for like sharing that URL, but it goes away, and if more than 3 people hit it, it kind of falls over. So I would recommend, like, if you can do something in CodePen, or like do some kind of Jekyll to Netlify kind of loop, or something to deploy, stuff. Like, we found that's a really great way to share things with the CodePen. You can just put a link in chat or text your friends or whatever, and then they can get back to you, whenever they're free. It doesn't have to happen right there.
Yeah. So now I'm kind of curious though about that part. So because that sounds like feedback. So like so none of these fancy annotation tools or like systems that like capture all this and put it into Dropbox and then do a dance and then like give it to you in a PDF. Like,
I feel like, I don't know, a JPEG is kind of the best lie you can tell your friends. And it's just because it's just a little picture of lies. So that's why I always go to the code best you can. But, there's a lot of good tools. One I'm looking, I want to try out this Framer one just because I've tried it in the past, but the new version, because I think it is pretty nice. But I think it has also like a React dependency. So if you're not all bought in on React, guess what? Like, it doesn't work that well for you or your team or your app or your, but then for 3D stuff, I use a library called A-Frame, which is really awesome for, it's by the folks at Mozilla. It's great for like building out really quick experiences and just to see like 3D objects in space, and you pull it up on your phone in a cardboard and it works great. So, and then beyond that, like Unity is another good 3D environment. You can like drop stuff in and move it around and play with stuff. So I experiment quite a bit there. So. Okay.
I think we can do one last question and that's it. So, so this one again is kind of just interesting because, it in many ways, it brings us to the very beginning. How do you deal with clients that don't want to prototype and assume they know what their users want? I think it's a fair question because again, it almost gets to the core part of, I do think a lot of businesses are almost scared of what they will find out from user researching and from getting like feedback and from getting data. But what, if you're in that, so I guess maybe it's a different thing. I mean, I doubt, Dave, it's very typical for someone to be like coming into your shop and saying like, I don't think we really want a prototype. What do you think? Or do they? Like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, not you. We put it on our website. Like, this is what we do. So hopefully they don't. But no, I understand though. I mean, to be honest, like they do know their customers. Like any business should know their customers. I would hope there's not like a CEO out there like, oh, I know what they like, widgets and, and I don't think like we usually rely on companies to kind of tell us about their customers because they would know them better than we would. I mean, we can go out and do qualitative user research and like go find customers. But I think like more or less like those companies do know their customers probably better than we do or we ever will. So you have to rely on them. I think though, my response to this question would be like, in the age of like fickle users who have no loyalty to any product whatsoever, like you got one shot, I feel like, to make a good impression on a feature or a new thing. And so if you ship a broken experience, guess what? They're like that meme with the guy looking at the two women. It's like that. They're just like, well, I'm just going to go to this new thing because that one is kind of busted. So that's my impression or like feeling about like why you want to do a good job, just because like, you lose a customer. You can lose customers. I mean, not everyone just hangs around anymore, so we're not all Ford people, so.
And I think also there's that adage of like, it's easier to retain an existing customer than to get a new one. So it's like if anytime you're in that risk for losing a base, then that's probably not a good thing. So I do want to respect our time frame here, and I want to respect all the folks who sat and watched, and hopefully you learned a little something. And thank you most importantly to the two panelists here, James Young, Dave, Rupert. Thank you so much, guys. This was fun. I really appreciate you taking the time out.
Excellent.
Thank you. And if anyone has questions, hit me up on Twitter. That's easy to do. So
Yeah, so
I'd
your
love to
Twitter,
follow
yeah,
up
we should
there.
probably mention where, so your Twitter is?
Davatron 5000, DAVATRON 5000. Not Davetron. That's a different guy. He's a very talented Rubyist. So don't hit him up. He gets a little upset. So.
And James, where can people find you?
Twitter's good as well, and that is just at JY for James Young Design, JY Design.
Awesome. Thank you again. Have yourselves a wonderful day. Thanks to everybody, and we will see you down the road. Take care.
I just do this.
Yeah, just do it until
for how long?